Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. 2018, we launched our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which lays out our position. It's nearly 7,000 words long, and it's based on the CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and it's asking for women to us to retain and promote our sex-based rights, but these are threatened by gender identity ideology, which is replacing the word woman as a sex-based word with gender identity and belief or faith that anybody can be a woman, so men. We outline why that's a problem, and in our declaration we've got 38,555,000 signatories supporting this position. They're from 160 countries, and we are supported by 537 organisations. We've got activists and volunteers from all over the world. We've got country contacts. And if you'd like to join us and get involved in promoting the declaration, that would be fantastic. We're going to first hear from Carole from Australia, from Lesbian Action Group. She's going to talk about the law case that's recently happened in the States related to lesbian action. It's not in the States, in Australia, related to Lesbian Action Group. Then we're going to hear from Jill Ovens, who is the Secretary of the Women's Rights Party New Zealand, and she's going to tell us about the work of the Women's Rights Party and give us some news about what's happening in terms of women's rights and the threats posed by gender identity ideology. And then we're going to hear from Vaishnavi Sundar, who is a filmmaker, and I guess everybody knows and probably has seen the film. She's going to tell us about Behind the Looking Glass, about the film, making it, the experience of it, how it got made, some of the inside stories, and what where you can see it, etc. If you haven't already yet seen it. I'm really pleased now to move to our first speaker, who is Carole. She's from Australia, from the Lesbian Action Group. Thank you so much, Carole, for coming on and talking to us about what's happening in Australia.
I'm Carole, and I'm in Australia, as Joe said, and I'm spokesperson for the Lesbian Action Group, LAG, and for the Lesbian Club, which we've just started. My activism goes back 40 years, and it's been devoted to lesbian activism, building lesbian community, creating events, making connections. And some years ago now, I thought, well, I've done enough activism. I'm just going to retire, put my feet up and potter in the garden and just play with my pets and do stuff like that you do when you retire. Well, seeing it, all the stuff that's been happening, and the erasure of lesbian culture, and the state of things with young lesbians in particular, I couldn't keep pottering. I had to get back in there. So about a year ago now, well, last July, after the Let Women Speak rally in Melbourne, when it all went really pear-shaped here, lots of women were traumatized by that. There was a group of us got together, a group of lesbians got together and said, enough of this whinging and talking and being scared. We've got to do something. We've got to do some action. So we decided that that's what we would do, and we formed the Lesbian Action Group. It was just an informal group of us. There were 12 of us, and the first action that we decided to do was to apply for an exemption to run lesbian-only events. Now, two of us in that group had, back in 2003, had been organising a lesbian event and been challenged by a trans person, a man, and were told that we needed to get an exemption, that we could then hold an event. So we did that back in 2003, and we actually won the exemption. But then another man, trans person, challenged that, and so we lost the exemption. And then a couple of years later, it happened again. And this time it went to court and cost money. So for 20 years now, our lesbian community has been underground, as it has in many countries, I think. We've only been able to have private events. We haven't been able to advertise. We have been having lots of events. In Victoria, it's been like 3 a year. We'd have camps and all sorts of events, but they were private and they were underground. And many of us, as you can see, are aging, and it gets to a stage where we're just dying out, and we weren't being able to let those lesbians who aren't in the networks know that there is a culture still there. There is events still there. So we decided that we would, again, in 2023, 20 years later, go for an exemption again. And we knew that from the state of the Sex Discrimination Act that, we weren't going to get it. But we decided to do it anyway so that we could raise awareness. And that's our main aim at the moment, is just to raise awareness. And I think we've been pretty successful at that. So we put in for an exemption to the Australian Human Rights Commission to run an event on International Lesbian Day in October last year, just for lesbians. And we said we wanted to do it at the Victorian Pride Centre, which, is a multi-million-dollar LGBTQAIA plus whatever monolith there, which we're not allowed into. So again, we tried booking a room there, knowing that they were going to turn us down, but that's what we wanted. We wanted to be able to publicise it. So this was back in July. So by August, we had our exemption application in. And then we had to ask for letters of support, and we got them from all over the world. It was just fantastic. Overall, we got around about 300 letters from everyone. And if you're someone who wrote one of those letters of support, thank you so much. I read a lot of them, and it's just wonderful. And so the Australian Human Rights Commission then had to make a decision about our exemption, and they did a preliminary decision, and as we had expected, they said, no, of course you can't discriminate like that. You have to, that's not inclusive. You can't have a lesbian event on International Lesbian Day without inviting the whole world. So the next step then was to ask for more letters of support, which we got, so that they then came up with their final decision. And that was in October. It was after International Lesbian Day, so the whole thing was moot anyway, because the decision was too late, even if they'd said yes. What we were asking for was an exemption for 5 years. You can get a temporary exemption under the Sex Discrimination Act if it is to equalise between what's it called? Groups that need help, anti-discrimination. And so we got the final decision in October, and we had actually moved them along a bit, which was quite impressive, because there we were, no lawyers, no nothing, just fumbling our way through it all. And we'd moved them from, no, you've got to include everyone, don't be silly. And this is testimony to the quality of the submissions and letters of support that came in from everybody. They moved from, you've got to let everybody in, to, okay, well, we'll concede that you can exclude heterosexual men, and we'll let you exclude gay men. That's fair enough. And we'll let you exclude heterosexual women. But you can't exclude transgender women who are lesbian. And that was their final decision. So, and they can do that because the Australian Human Rights Commission has declared that sex is not binary, and we can all change our sex over the course of our life. And that's backed up, of course, by our laws, which say that's true. Anyone can, in most states in Australia now, except New South Wales, can change their sex on their birth certificates, and you can do it every 12 months. It's laughable if it wasn't so damn serious. So we got this decision, which was no surprise, and we had publicised it as wide as we could. And as part of that final decision, they told us that, firstly, that we had the right of appeal, that we could appeal to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. The second thing they told us, or they would seem to be pushing us towards, a permanent exemption, which is part of the Sex Discrimination Act, that if you are a membership-based club, you can get to choose whoever you want as your members. And as long as you run events for members only, then that's fine. No one can complain or make a complaint against you. So we took both of those bits of advice, and even though it's not our ultimate aim, we decided we'd go down the road of setting up a membership-based club so that we could have events for lesbians only, and we could vet who came into our club. So we set up the Lesbian Club. We did that at the beginning of the year. It's been a roller coaster ride, the whole thing. I'm exhausted, but there you go. That's the life of an activist. So we set up the Lesbian Club, and we're doing really well. We've got a lesbian conference coming up in 2 weeks' time, and we've had a calendar of events all year, and we're getting new members, women who were so isolated, they had no idea there were other lesbians out there. We're even having success with some younger lesbians, i.e. under 30. We've got 5 of them talking at our conference coming up. So, that's a success. It still means that we're semi-underground. We're a private club, but at least we can reach out, and we can have these events now legally, and they're not going to be able to challenge us. We just have to grow our membership, which is what we need to do. And if you're in Australia because it's Australia-wide, not just Victoria. If you're in Australia and you're a lesbian, please join the Lesbian Club. We need the numbers. There's strength in numbers. The other thing that we did was take up, well, we thought about appealing, and by that stage we were all just worn out by it all. It was quite stressful. And said, no, let's, we've done what we set out to do. Let's not go any further. And besides which, we're bumbling around here. We don't have a clue what we're doing. And then at the 11th hour, i.e. the day before the appeal application was due to go in, I thought, no, we've come too far. We have to do this. So we managed to find a lawyer, a barrister, Lee Howard, and Anna Kerr from the Feminist Legal Clinic was our solicitor, and Megan Blake was our researcher. Fantastic legal team. We could not have done better. We put together some submissions, challenged the Australian Human Rights Commission to try and get that decision turned over. Again, we're not sure. I mean, it's because of their definition of sex. I mean, how can you get round that if any man can say he's a lesbian? So we're not really expecting to win it, but again, we want to make as much publicity out of it as possible and awareness raising as possible. There's all sorts of stories from the tribunal, which, will have to be for another day. It was actually quite fun. I was on the witness stand for 3 hours, and I got to tell legal people that no, men cannot be women, and no, men cannot be lesbians, and all sorts of great stuff that we all say to each other in private, but here I was being able to say it in a legal setting, and it was great. I quite enjoyed myself, actually. And I really think the Australian Human Rights Commission had underestimated us because we had bumbled around previously. They didn't realise that we had a really good legal team at this stage of the case, and they were very underprepared for it. So, Lee, our barrister, is actually optimistic. He ran instead of challenging what is a lesbian, he ran the case on freedom of association and freedom of assembly and freedom from being assimilated into the LGBTQ alphabet soup. So it's a different sort of tack to take, and it might work. He says we have 60% chance of winning. And if we lose, it's not on our arguments, it's on the stupid laws that are here in Australia that we just can't get around at the moment. So we really need to be challenging those laws at every opportunity. That's a really potted version of what we've been through in the last 18 months.
Thank you so much for reactivating and being so active and working on this and getting so much publicity and then making these really coherent arguments. There are a couple of questions. Somebody's asked, what's the name of the case? I know you said before, but they came into the chat afterwards. So would you tell us again?
It's LAG, or Lesbian Action Group, versus AHRC, Australian Human Rights Commission. And it's at a tribunal. It's not actually a legal court as such. It's a place where you go to protest to say that decision wasn't okay.
You've had quite reasonable amounts of success, but you thought you probably wouldn't win, but it would raise awareness. And have you had a lot of feedback from the general public or from the lesbian community or the feminist community that it has really raised the profile of these issues?
I think it has. We have a presence on X. It's at Active Lesbians, if anyone wants to follow us. But yes, it is hard to know. But it seems that whilst a lot of people somehow in their head seem to accept that men can be women, when you ask them, well, can men be lesbians? It's a step too far for a lot of people. So I think in those terms, it does raise awareness. It makes people do a double take as, men, lesbians.
We'll move on now to our next speaker, who is Jill Ovens from New Zealand. She is from the Women's Rights Party. She's secretary of the Women's Rights Party New Zealand, is going to tell us about the work of the Women's Rights Party and your work and also what's going on in New Zealand. So thank you so much, Jill, for coming. And I'm just going to hand over to you.
Oh, thanks, Joe. So the Women's Rights Party of New Zealand is actually a signatory of the WDI as well. So we're aware that the UK's just got your Labor government, but we had one for 6 years between 2017 and 2023. And during that time, lobby groups that were funded by the government of the time, backed up by the Green Party, pushed an agenda that put women's rights and those of girls at risk. And at the same time, what happened throughout our public service and in our mainstream media, our unions, our universities, women's voices got shut down. And girls in high school, for example, couldn't speak out if they didn't go along with their pronouns and all the rest of the stuff that was being shoved down through their school. So if anybody questioned gender ideology, their jobs were put at risk. And lesbians were thrown out of pride events and publicly attacked by trans activists, who we call TRAs. In the name of inclusivity, therefore, women have been excluded from public debate and our rights have been eroded. And so who would have thought that that would have happened in New Zealand, which 131 years ago was the first self-governing country in the world for women to win the vote? Here we are, it's like Carole said, having to activate again to exercise our votes to protect our hard-won rights. So what happened with me, it was the insidious erasure of women from our language that piqued me. When women were missing from the equity section of the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions strategic plan, I thought it was a typo. And so I questioned that. And then I saw that in the list of marginalised groups that we were going to protect in terms of equity was people of all gender identities. So I said, well, surely you don't think women are a gender identity. I thought it was so bizarre that I posted it on Facebook and immediately got piled on by all my left-leaning friends. Trans women are women. That was their mantra. Soon after, there was an article in one of our national newspapers that was titled, "Not all pregnant people are women or mothers." And the intro doubled down saying, today, not all people who have babies, no, I'll have to say it again, it's so convoluted. Today, not only are not all people who have babies not mothers, not all of them are even women. So distorted. This was followed by the health sector and NGOs renaming women as cervix havers, menstruators, birthing people, and chest feeders. Meanwhile, we have campaigns about prostate cancer, which don't worry about identifying that prostate cancer is a disease only of men. And in fact, we have ads running on our TV for weight loss supplements for real men. You'd never see real women mentioned on our TV ads. Another thing, I was at a meeting with the Green Party MP to plan a campaign around birth injuries in our accident compensation regime, and we were listing the stakeholders on a whiteboard. So of course, women was put up. Immediately, the Green Party MP's executive assistant picked up a whiteboard eraser and erased the word women and wrote instead birthing people. So we were literally erased in terms of birth injuries. And when women shared our concerns and submissions to the Select Committee, considering the bill to allow people to change their sex on their birth certificate, the submitters were treated with absolute disdain by the Labour and Green women MPs. Most submitters were opposed to self-sex ID, yet the bill passed without a single dissenting vote among the MPs, not from the left and nor from the right. New Zealanders can now change their sex online as many times as they like. At one stage within the Labour Party, there was a nasty dispute that broke out when the rainbow sector, which is mostly young men, called for gender-neutral toilets in all new public facilities. There were complaints and counter-complaints about the dispute that went all the way to the Labour Party Council without a resolution. The rainbow sector demands continued. For example, they were wanting recognition of non-binary and trans women as candidate selections within the party, and they wanted to utilise our 50% women's quota. The proposal didn't get any support at the 2022 conference floor, but that was only because the rainbow sector ended up arguing with each other about the timing. Also, we had an amendment from the Auckland Labour Women's Meeting to a remit calling for more public toilets for women and children, as well as the elderly and disabled, and that was shut down because any mention of women's toilets is code for transphobia. Another amendment from the Women's Meeting would have restricted gender reassignment surgery to those aged over 18, and that amendment was withdrawn under huge pressure from the Labour hierarchy. So the remit went through the 2022 conference without any age restriction. And that surgery has already been made free on the public purse by the then Labour government. So it was no surprise when in March 2023, Labour and Greens Party MPs openly supported the shocking violence at Auckland, New Zealand's Let Women Speak event, where Kelly J. Keane fled the country in fear of her life. This followed the Melbourne and Hobart Let Women Speak events and quickly deteriorated into a dangerous situation in New Zealand that was whipped up by the media in the week before with allegations of links to Nazism. And it was stoked by leaders of both New Zealand Labour and Greens. Any doubts about exactly how much women meant to our MPs were laid to rest. So not one MP from the left condemned the violence perpetrated that day. In fact, some of them were among the trials yelling at us. We were traumatised, as Carole was saying. The noise from the protesters was incredibly disturbing, and the hatred on their faces as they burst through the barriers and pushed us towards the rotunda was hugely intimidating. There was no sign of any police protection as women frantically called 111. So that night, our co-leader Dawn Trenberth and I left the Labour Party, and the following Sunday, we convened a Zoom meeting attended by 20 women, and the Women's Rights Party was born on the 2nd of April 2023. So the first thing we had to do was set about registering, recruiting enough members to get the 500 financial members we needed to register the party and be on the ballot in the upcoming 2023 general election. We held an inaugural conference in June where members approved a constitution and policy platform. The Women's Rights Party policies clearly lay out our priorities for women and children, and they leave no room to wonder whose side we're on. They cover a broad range of health, employment, social and wellbeing issues for women because women have a broad range of needs that require radical solutions. Despite a complete blackout by the mainstream media, we attracted the interests of an alternative platform, digital platform, and within 24 hours of my first appearance on that platform, more than 100 women and some men had joined up from all over New Zealand, ensuring that we could reach our goal to register by the deadline, which was in July last year. We contested the general election in October with very little money, but we had the women power of 12 courageous women from all over the country. And the candidates included a chief executive, former chief executives of the colleges of midwives, an international kayaker and whitewater rafter who is active in Save Women's Sports, a leading feminist economist, a young business student, and New Zealand's first woman trade qualified joiner. We knew we wouldn't make it into Parliament, but that's not why we stood. By registering as a political party, that meant having our logo and name on the ballot paper in every polling booth in New Zealand because of our proportional electoral system. 2,500 people voted for us. So having our logo on the ballot mattered for those who were politically homeless. But more importantly, building party organisation around the country, getting members out sign waving, leafleting markets, shopping centres, dropping banners all over the motorway, and our National Suffrage Day activities in September all laid a foundation for our party going forward. And of course, it was an opportunity to highlight gender critical women and men because things were very dire. Millions of dollars of government funding had gone into transgender NGOs with huge influence throughout the public sector, including our health and education systems, where our children were being fed a confusing litany of lies that they can change their sex, and that there was a guess made at their birth as to what sex they were. So the violence at Albert Park brought out into the open as well the extreme misogyny which has been flourishing largely underground in online spaces, both here in New Zealand and internationally. And we make no bones about it. The trans movement is a men's rights movement, and they certainly act as such, as we saw at Albert Park. And those who speak out in favour of women's rights get cast as transphobes and haters, and the TRAs target our events that we've organised, trying to shut them down and intimidate us. So on Suffrage Day last year, a group of TRAs actually hunted us down as we moved from downtown Wellington, where we were handing out cake in celebration of women winning the vote. They followed us as we joined a lesbian visibility protest outside the Ministry of Women's Affairs. And then they followed us to Parliament grounds, where we had planned a symbolic suffrage action involving chaining ourselves to the historic gates. Unfortunately, the TRAs made such a nuisance of themselves, they alerted parliamentary security, and we were all moved on. So we're now in our second year. We've had our second conference, and members voted and discussed on our campaign priorities. And there was broad agreement on what needed to be done, despite the change of government in the general election last year that seemed to be more favourable to our point of view. The new coalition government made a really good start. They said they were going to defund sports that allowed men to compete in women's sports, and they said they would legislate for single-sex publicly used facilities, and we're still waiting for those to be implemented. However, the coalition government's massive job losses in the public services will inevitably lead to cuts in services that will hurt women and children. And so far this year, about 6,500 public employees have lost their jobs. And the finance minister's demanding that all ministries make further cuts to up to 15,000 jobs. In the midst of a housing crisis, it was announced last week that 500 jobs are to be cut from our state housing department, and all public housing that was underway to be built is now stalled. There's been cuts to the free food and schools program, and all this will have a significant impact on our poorest families who are already struggling with big increases in the cost of living. A petition that midwife Deb Hayes initiated, and it attracted 7,500 signatures, has failed so far to stop our midwifery regulator from implementing a midwifery scope of practice that somehow managed to not mention women and babies. This is a statutory document that defines the boundaries of midwifery care, designed to protect women and children, as well as the midwives themselves. And to add insult to injury, the select committees decided not to make public the submission by Mana Wahine Kororo on the appropriation of Māori language in the scope of practice, which is just a cover to drive the midwifery regulator's trans agenda. So the justice system is also captured. Earlier this year, a judge discharged a thug who smashed an elderly woman's eye socket in a violent, unprovoked attack at the Albert Park Let Women Speak event. He got off without conviction, which has sent a chilling message to women and our children, where male violence against women is endemic and so often diminished in its severity and impact on the victim. More recently, the trial we call Tomato Boy was convicted of assaulting Kelly J. Keane and one of the Albert Park organisers, Tanya Sturt. But he was discharged without a penalty because of his good works with the rainbow community and because he supposedly suffered enough abuse online, which none of us did. So meantime, the gender woo legislation agenda continues. Just before the general election last year, one of the Green MPs, who's now a former MP, she put up a bill to Parliament to include gender identity and expression in our Human Rights Act. And the former Labor government then asked the Law Commission, which is an independent statutory body, to investigate whether the current human rights legislation adequately protects transgender and non-binary people and those with innate characteristics, variation of characteristics. And the Law Commission produced a 211-page issues paper, which set out to prove, there is indeed a need to include gender as a protected ground of discrimination. And worse than that, though, the Commission's report attacked almost every exception that there is in the Act, which allows organisations and employers to discriminate to protect sex-based rights, such as rights to single-sex spaces in the interests of privacy and dignity. The report also sought views on regulating misgendering and dead naming, which of course we opposed, along with their use of the term throughout the document of cis women and sex being assigned at birth. At one point, they even said some people have an opinion that sex is binary. So in July, what we did is we brought Sal Grover over to New Zealand to highlight the implications of the legal case Tickle versus Giggle, as the Law Commission is watching to see how they will go in terms of our New Zealand anti-discrimination legislation. Sal spoke of the consequences of adding gender identity and expression into the Australian Sex Discrimination Act 2013. And ours is pretty much the same wording that's being proposed. And she also raised the role of sex self-ID laws in threatening women and girls' rights and the boundaries, and how the case highlighted commitments of both our countries to CEDAW. So Sal's tour was well attended around New Zealand, despite a mainstream media blackout and attempts by TRAS to get us cancelled by contacting our venues. We made the whole tour public. It was the first time we've ever tried to do public events. The Citizens Advice Bureau bowed down to the pressure in one centre, so we found an alternative venue, and only that morning we told the ticket holders where the new venue was. In Wellington, where we were going to have our meeting at Victoria University, the TRAS openly planned on X how they were going to go about disrupting our meeting by making so much noise we wouldn't be able to continue. Again, we booked an alternative venue and we advised our ticket holders to arrive there an hour earlier. It was a bit like the piggy going to the market. By the time the TRAS realised that we weren't going to turn out to the meeting, to the university rather, our meeting was well underway. And eventually they found where we were and they yelled and carried on outside for about 25 minutes. It was freezing cold out there. And meantime, we were inside the meeting. We just turned up the volume of our speaker system, and we were in the toasty warmth of the hall. Sal subsequently attended our consultation with the Law Commission about the addition of gender identity into our legislation. She came in by Zoom, and we followed that up with a huge submission in which lots of our members contributed. So last week, we organised submissions around a revised surrogacy bill that's before the government. In a joint submission with WDI New Zealand, we argued that while commercial surrogacy is technically illegal in New Zealand, the involvement of fertility services in surrogacy through assisted reproduction technology is a commercial activity, which is paid for by the intending parents and has potential harm for both birth mothers and surrogate-born children. Even though commercial surrogacy is against the law here, we have a situation where those who've got the means can essentially buy a baby to be carried and birthed by a woman who is a commodity in what is a profit-driven transaction by a booming surrogacy business. We question whether having a baby through surrogacy is a human right. Does that imply a societal duty to provide babies who can't have their own, for people who can't have their own children? In whose interests does surrogacy serve? The parents or the child's? We unequivocally opposed international surrogacy, regardless of how it's organised. And in particular, we called for a ban on surrogacy involving the export of frozen eggs or embryos to commission a commercial gestational surrogacy. Yesterday, we learned that New Zealand's prescribing up to 7 times more puberty blockers to trans kids than other similar countries. In the first study of its kind, New Zealand researchers found the use of the drugs for gender dysphoria began first in 2011 when about 50 children received the puberty blockers, and usage increased steeply from 2014 to 2022, at which point 400 children were put on blockers. Remember, this is a country with only 5 million population. So the Ministry of Health is undergoing its own review on the safety and reversibility of the drugs in order to develop clinical guidelines based on the latest evidence. They previously said that puberty blockers were safe and reversible, but that's gone from their website now. The Ministry's review should have been finished last year, but they delayed it until April and then in August so that the CAS review findings could be considered. It's yet to be released, and no one seems to know why the delay. Finally, the Human Rights Review Tribunal was to hear a complaint by lesbian visibility group Lava. That'll happen sometime next year, but they're already fundraising for that. And as one of our members has said in her Substack, this is an important case for lesbians and for women and for rainbow people who really believe in inclusion and tolerance, and for people who want the freedom to define their sexuality, one that involves consenting adults without being called harmful, hateful bigots. So you can gather from this, it sometimes feels like that toy whack-a-mole where we're fighting on so many fronts. We face a challenge as to how to respond to issues that are beyond transgenderism, because we are a party that's clearly pro-women's rights and clearly of the left, but we get named as being transphobic, anti-trans, but we are far more than that. So it's true, we don't want men and women's changing shares and competing unfairly in women's sports, but we do want women's health to be prioritised, and we want more support for women who are victims of violence and sexual assault. We also want specific services for detransitioners who are becoming increasingly common. We want better income support for women and children, affordable childcare, pay equity claims to be settled in a timely fashion, and we want superannuation that ensures dignity for women as we age. Our legislative agenda calls for repeal of the sex self-ID law and for restrictions on puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones and gender reassignment surgery with children and adolescents. But how do we deal with issues that challenge our society, like climate change, race relations, and war? These are issues that divide our party. Are we to opt out of these debates to be known as a single issue party? Can we get political as gender critical feminists while ignoring social and economic issues that impact on women and children, both here and internationally? These are among the challenges that we face with members who span the political spectrum on different issues. The other day, I asked our members to suggest a title for this presentation. Various options were put forward, including the Emmeline Pankhurst quote, "I incite this meeting to rebellion." Holding the line was felt by most to express our values. It's a term we know well in New Zealand because of our rugby culture, where players defend the line to prevent opponents getting a try. Holding the line means we don't yield to pressure even when others have been prepared to make concessions. Holding the line means we show courage when we're under attack. We're not going to be intimidated by a men's rights group or those who've been indoctrinated in queer theory and who accuse us of appropriating women's rights. As the Spanish would say, no pasaran.
So, Vaishnavi, welcome. You've been on lots of times on WDI. Congratulations on a completely fantastic, another fantastic film after Dysphoric a couple of years ago. This is amazing to get this out so quickly and it be so, it's just wonderful to watch it. It's so beautiful and very, very moving and politically amazing. You're making so many important points, but I think it's, to me, when I was watching it, I was thinking that this can reach a lot of different people who are not already rabid TERFs. This is going to be acceptable to ordinary people who just think, I want to know about this. Vaishnavi Sundar is a filmmaker, feminist activist, country contact for WDI India, and she's going to talk to us about Behind the Looking Glass, the latest documentary, which discusses in detail the experience of trans widows, women whose partners have or want to transition. So over to you.
In the process of 3 years that it took me to make this film, to finish this film. I have come on WDI Feminist Question Time twice before already. And then I also had the opportunity to meet some women at the London conference that we had alongside Philia last year. So during this entire 3 years of time, I was basically just either filming women or collecting information online, researching, or I'm just editing. Editing alone would have taken a large chunk of my time in the course of these 3 years. But the film is now done. And I agree with you that it was a conscious effort to make it a film that isn't just about how angry we are about this whole ideology. I wanted all kinds of different people to be able to watch the film, kind of make it, lack of a better word, palatable for everyone to watch it. But even then, there were a lot of women who were saying that it was difficult for them to watch it. What I was thinking was, when they were making these comments under YouTube, they haven't even heard the actual most grotesque parts yet. So this was an effort that I was very conscious about, that I need to make sure it doesn't shock people off of our film. I wanted people to watch it from the start to finish and have like a thought to themselves about the silencing of wives and children within this ideology, where we now have an opportunity to discuss something about men and women who regret transitioning themselves. But within the scope of gender ideology, there is this vacuum about the voices of the families and the children that are left behind along the way, particularly by men, because their motivations seem to be far more insidious than the motivations for young women to opt to transition, as we all know. Now, um, I did not think in the beginning that I would have such a positive response from trans widows themselves. And I have managed to, feeling so grateful about it, that I've managed to collect stories from not just the US and the UK, which we think is the epicenter of all of this, which it is, but there are also a lot of women that are affected by it across the world. And I was fortunate enough to have their stories to be part of the film as well. The reason why it took so long is also because I was very patient in making sure, try and show it to person as a global phenomenon, rather than just it being about women in the UK and the US. Now, when I was researching and I was talking to these women, I was very confident that I wouldn't get a lot of people to talk to me, first of all, and then to agree to be part of a film like this. But I was really wrong, because the women were just waiting for an opportunity to speak. And when I asked them, they talked. They just talked and talked and talked. And then at one point, it was just 40 something women whose stories I was completely stored in my head. I knew inside out about all the things that happened to them. I knew what they liked. I knew what their favorite books were and movies were and things like that. We built a sort of a beautiful relationship with all of them in a way that was good, because that is how I could conceptualize this film in my head while I was talking to these women in much, much early stages, when I hadn't even fully understood that whether a film can be made about this topic at all. There were a lot of uh, choice that women had to make about whether or not they can be public about their story. As you would have seen, some of them are very public about it, with their face and their name displayed on screen for anybody to see. Now, these are women for whom such experiences have happened when they were younger, and they have already spoken in other platforms, so they were very happy to be a public face for defending the rights of trans widows. And then there were others who, for their safety or the safety of their children, had to be anonymous. And I thought, if that was the only thing that was stopping them from sharing their story, it is not fair. And considering that this is the first ever film made on this subject, I thought I should be able to make a possibility to incorporate those stories as well. Because if I was to only rely on women who are happy to speak publicly, then that would be a very small number. And it would, in my head, I was thinking, the fact that these women are anonymous actually says so much about the dangers that these women would face, rather than say that, oh, they are, not brave enough to speak about it publicly. They aren't able to speak about it because of the dangers that they might face in the hands of their spouses, or they were mostly 99% of them were worried about whether the child or their children would be taken away by this abusive man. In the process of making this film, there were a lot of experiences that I had to look for a lot of animators because 8 stories had to be made from scratch. Now, there are only so many women who are available at any given time for a project. And a lot of these women, animators who I worked with, both in Dysphoric as well as for this film, all had day jobs and they could only give me some evenings and maybe some weekends. And in that, they had their own commitment. So I had to really wait for some time where they could finish this project for me. So I started looking for animators online to see, how these websites advertise that with their portfolio and things. I put out ads asking if women would be interested in working on a project like this. They got all kinds of different responses. Some would just blatantly say things like, "You're such a horrible person to want to make a film on this subject." Others would say, "I understand this is important, but I don't think it is right for me to be part of a project like this." Some would just not respond at all. But then one Pakistani animator, her name is Savera, she was very happy to get in touch with me. She looked at it as just a project. She was interested in the fact that I was talking about male violence against women, and that kind of connected with her. And I had privilege to work with a Pakistani animator in the process of making this film, apart from the Indian animators that I was already working with. But despite these difficulties of finding my crew members, we managed to pull together a project like this of this magnitude with so much patience on my part, I suppose, a lot of waiting on my part. In the process of waiting, I learned a lot of things to do by myself, which is my entire filmmaking career, to be honest. But it was also great for me because I started doing little animations myself because I just couldn't wait. Yeah, in the process of making this film, there was also this risk of whether I would raise enough funds to be able to pay all these women, because I was constantly advertising that I need more animators, more illustrators, more this, more that, because the film demanded something like that, because it's a full-length feature documentary. And in a real world, if it had been made by a big production house, you'd have, I don't know, 50, 60 people working on this project, 20 people just for little things, and then there would be this main animator, and then there'll be subordinates, and then this, and then here I was, just me, and then just a few women, right? It was a very, very difficult task to do it. So funding was like a very scary thing to ask for, because I wanted to make sure that the women that were working for me were truly compensated for their time and their efforts, because the last thing I want is to ask women to work for exposure or for experience or something like that. So there was that risk as well, but women came together and a lot of women donated. I don't know, it was such a happy feeling when women donate as little as $2 or $5 or something like that. And it truly sometimes brings tears in my eyes, because if somebody is willing to part with $2 or $5, then it really says something about how much she wants to support a project despite not being able to make a big donation. And I have been so moved by all these gestures by women world over. And I think I should definitely mention that as part of why I could keep going on, because it felt like this is the kind of grassroots film or a project that I want to be a part of, where women from around the world who have no idea who I am, but are able to send me $2 and $5 because they want this project to be made. And that made me truly happy. And there were also a lot of ongoing legal cases while I was in the process of making a film. That's a challenge with the project that takes so long to make, right? So in the process, there were some women who just couldn't be part of our film anymore. So I had already edited some of their parts into the film, but then now they were at such grave danger from their ex-partners, so they had to completely just remove themselves. Even anonymity wouldn't help and things like that. So I had to, till the very end, till the moment I uploaded it on YouTube and all of you watched it, it was like a constant fear that somebody might have some risk to their life, to their children's lives or whatever, and I would have to redo the whole thing. But then it's not possible, because you do music composition for the whole film, you do sound design for the whole film. So if somebody were to ask their part to be removed, it would have been such a nightmare. But I did not ask women to sign any release forms or something like that, because it is not one of those things where you can say, well, I don't care if your ex-husband is coming after you, you've signed this release form, so you have to be part of this project. I couldn't have said that, so I didn't sign any release form or anything of that sort. So there was this constant risk that somebody might just decide not to want to be part of this project till the very last minute. But thankfully, it all happened in the early stage and it was still manageable. Oh, and there are a lot of aspects that I could have incorporated and bring it back home to India. But then I chose not to do that, because I realized India is still quite unclear about the terminology, first of all, and there is this difficulty of unifying Indian women as one unit because we don't have a common language and not all of us understand English. And for them to know what trans widow is and for me to have access to all of them, then that would mean that I can only access people who understand English because I don't speak any other language in India. And there was already a challenge of making this about India. But I think I can confidently say that there are women whose partners are doing this to their wives because there is a lot of subreddits which is exclusively India centered, and there are all of these men with all of their perversions and paraphilias who constantly talk about themselves with women's lingerie, calling themselves a slut or a sissy or things like that. There are all kinds of really strange. I mean, I went down this rabbit hole and I regretted it today and even today because it's just one of the most disturbing things I have seen in my whole life. Now, also, courts are able to grant divorces to women on the basis of the fact that the partner has opted for sex change surgery. Now, it is not because the court cares about these women. It is because they believe in the legal aspect, Hindu Marriage Act or Special Marriage Act. Marriage happens between male and female. Now, when one person claims that he is no longer male, then the marriage becomes void. So the women who is affected by this, it's very hard to reach her because Indian system is such that it is always about the perpetrator versus the state. And even if I were to find out who this woman is, the chances of her explaining her situation to me or me explaining that this is a global phenomenon, whether she would be interested in being part of a project like this is just so far-fetched. So perhaps an India-based film is waiting to be made, and at one point I will make it. But I think there is a lot of many hills to climb before I can make awareness about the subject in my country and in extension global south in itself. During the research process, I spoke to many women who couldn't be part of the film, one from Mexico, one from Brazil. So it is happening in the global south, and we know for a fact that women are affected by this. It is going to be probably a separate film at some point in future to talk about this in countries where we have challenges in terms of language, education, poverty, and other things. But that's the reason why I couldn't talk in detail about India. Another thing I couldn't talk in detail about in this film, and I'm sure a lot of people have asked me this before as well, is talk about lesbian trans widows. Now, I have talked about pornography and the kind of abuse and manipulation and other things that these men put these wives through. I thought it would be unfair if I just insert the lesbian motivation behind wanting to transition as just a chapter in all of this and how the partner who's remaining would feel about this. I thought it would be unfair because that warrants another dedicated focus on what this is because the motivations are completely different. And I thought it would be unfair if I just insert it as one little thing. And of course, finally, once now that the film is over, we are facing shadow banning and demonetization on YouTube and things like that. You can see the film, but you will have to go through a few extra steps before you can find them. They are making it difficult for women to find it. If it is so easy that you can just look up, type behind the looking glass and watch it, then it's easier. But if you make it harder for people to watch it, then maybe 2 out of 10 people will be dissuaded from watching it, right? And that's what they want. They've kept my film, but they have shadow banned it. They have demonetized it. They've told me that the ad people would find our film unsuitable for their advertisements. But guess what advertisements are playing when our film is running? Pro-gender identity ads. And I get nothing from it. So it's the same example of women's labor being exploited by men. So that's the long and short of it. The film is online for you to watch, and I've since uploaded it on X as well. If you haven't watched it, please watch it. We've had some local screenings as well in different parts of UK. There are a few coming up. A lot of people, a lot of women are just gathering together as friends, and they're watching it on TV and things like that. The film has subtitles in 8 languages, all thanks to the volunteers who've come from around the world, have just it's just like dysphoric. It's our film. It's like a resource that's for all of us. So go ahead and download it, screen it, do whatever you want with it, but just make sure that the voices of trans widows and the children who are affected by this is somehow heard. And you can do that now because we have this film. You don't have to do the talking, just have to share it. So thank you very much.
What do you think is the best way forward in India? I'm hearing news stories on a daily basis of women being raped and murdered. For example, there was a recent incident of a female doctor in Kolkata being raped and killed after a long shift. Do you have hope that India will ever change for the better? That's the first
No,
question.
no.
No.
No, it's going to be, I have to be honest about why I hate this country so much and the men of this country so much. I genuinely hate them. There is something really, really bottom of the barrel depraved mentality that these men have. And I want to attribute a lot of this to use of pornography and easy access to smartphones that, even men in rural areas are able to do it. There is a rape. And 4 years ago, I had the opportunity to campaign to an MP in Canada against MindGeek, the company that runs pornography, Pornhub. A few of us made a presentation where we said, these are the problems Pornhub and companies like Pornhub are creating. In that, I said 4 years ago, that whenever there is a gang rape happening, the first thing Indian men do is look up their names on porn websites. Now, back then, I had written to a lot of these liberal feminist mainstream media companies, asking them to commission me a gig where I can write about this, when I can explain the connection between pornography and what is going on with the rape statistic in this country. I did not get any response because I had already become a bigot by then, a Nazi by then, a fascist by then. So they were not interested in it. Now, after this Kolkata case that Vaishnavi is talking about, every mainstream media seems to have found this, like as if they have found this is thought of it by themselves. They are now saying that there is a strong influence between pornography and the way men behave. So it's like if they want it, if they find any benefit from it, they will go run with it. But when actually women who have been working on this for so long, just because we're talking against this trans ideology, suddenly everything else that we say also doesn't make sense or also is not important enough for them to allow us to be published with their website and things like that. I don't have hope that this country will ever be better, but I do have hope that women are tolerating less and less bullshit with the way things are right now, and more women are saying no to behaviors like this. Women are able to catch red flags sooner. Of course, unfortunately, there is a steady rise in the number of young girls wanting to transition as well for very obvious reasons. Why would a girl want to be a girl in a freaking shithole like this country, right? Why would a girl not
Yeah.
take up an opportunity, a golden opportunity? Because that's providing you with a solution today. I mean, fighting patriarchy aside, that's going to take forever, right? Today, they're telling you that you will not be raped by your family member because you're gay. You can just become a boy today and then you can be with the girl that you love. Why would she not take that? So it's a very dangerous situation, twofold dangerous situation. Women are able to identify male violence against women, but there's also a steady rise in the way young girls are choosing to just flee from womanhood, right? Because we don't have enough role models to look up to, and where it can be normalized that if I'm a woman and I love women and I love another woman, it is not that I have to become a man for me to pursue that. I can just be a woman and I can be a lesbian woman. It's just perfectly fine. But that kind of an education or that kind of thought process is not there. And the media and other departments, the stakeholders of the country, have a lot of money and social capital at stake. So they're not normalizing homosexuality. Instead, they're saying all this bigotry is going on. Therefore, we need to promote transgender ideology because they benefit from it too, right?
Yeah.
So this is all you listen to everywhere: social media. Joe, for an article that's got absolutely nothing to do with trans, right? Mainstream media companies are saying cis women.
If women want to get you to come to do a screening in their country, is that a sort of thing you'd do, that you would come and talk to people? Like, because quite often there are film screenings and then afterwards people can actually talk to you and ask questions. Is that possible that I know to raise funds to get you to come over, but is that possible?
There is definitely possible. There's already conversations with a few radical feminists who are considering that possibility. And even if they can't invite me over, Zoom is like the next best option. Even if they do a screening somewhere, I'm happy to send them on Google Drive the files and whatever subtitles they need. I'm happy to give them all of that, and they can do a screening. And the Q&A can happen online as well, because I understand we as a movement, we have very little money, and there are so many things that need money, legal cases and this and that. So there's chances of us chances of me flying down to another country, it's an expensive thing, and I understand that not everybody is able to do it. But the next best thing is doing it on Zoom, and I'm very happy to do that just the same. So as long as we are able to get women together to watch it and discuss it, and then in turn go and talk about this, politically elsewhere in different groups and things like that. That's the victory, right? We're not going to have red carpet for films like ours. We definitely are not going to get awards and things like that, but
have you had any mainstream support? Has anybody invited you to like bring it to the Sundance Film Festival or whatever, or give you an Oscar or stuff like that? And are you in touch with the mainstream, or are you just really completely cancelled?
well, of course, I'm completely cancelled. And if I submit a film like this, Sundance, for every film entry submission, you'd have to pay them. You'd have to pay them to submit your film.
Wow.
There is an entry fee. All of these big festivals are like that. It's not possible to just send your film like that. There are categories and there are entry fees, and they do this kind of a gatekeeping so that they don't have just so many people sending them films, right? It only makes sense because they have only limited number of resources themselves. But then you can be rest assured that all of these mainstream film festivals will not touch our film even with a barge pole, because they are the ones that are screening film like the one that Will Ferrell is on. It really just comes down to us. The mainstream media is not going to want to platform a film like this. Even the ones within our ideology where people are critical about this, the seemingly big platforms and everything, aren't going to be interested in this subject. I realize that based on my experience wanting to get in touch with them and things like that. It's because it's male violence against women, and nobody wants to listen to these women's stories and how it is affecting children unless you're choosing to be trans. Then suddenly it's the hot topic. Trans is the hot topic, not the ramifications that this ideology leave behind. And I've understood that in a very, very hard way. So it really comes down to us. It was very hard in this 3 years, to make this film and everything. But the film is out now. It's out. It's there. All we have to do is just keep sharing it and keep making people watch it somehow. So if you can create these avenues where you can just collect a few friends and make an evening out of it or something like that. I know it's not a pleasant watch, but it would still be something that we can discuss and understand. And it gives you a lot of pointers when you want to argue with somebody as well, or if you want to make a statement in a parliament, for example. It gives you a lot of points, and you can make use of that as a resource, just like you would as a PDF, for example. So I just ask women to, make this film your own, and just, share it as much as you can.
Okay, hello, sisters. Let me begin by sharing some highlights from WDI USA's convention, which took place in Atlanta over the weekend. First, the weather was gorgeous, sunny and warm, which is always a pleasure as we head into fall. It was held at Lowe's Hotel, whose staff could not have been more pleasant and accommodating, and the food provided was varied, abundant, and delicious. Despite the fact the hotel was flying the dreaded progress flag higher than the American flag, we did not encounter a single protester. Next, I'd like to tip my hat to the board and the convention coordinating team for providing attendees the perfect balance of programming and downtime, which allowed for oodles of networking as well as socializing. I'd also like to recognize attendees for engaging with each other and with speakers respectfully, even when presented with topics where we disagree. All in all, it was a fantastic experience, and I believe we left with full hearts and recharged batteries, ready to continue the vital work ahead. Next, I'd like to mention a new blog post by the Lesbian Caucus titled Building Real-Life Lesbian Community, a Practical Guide, that was published on the 17th, as well as an interview by Lesbian Caucus member Brandy Koken, I hope I pronounced that correctly, with Susan Hawthorne, the Australian writer, poet, political commentator, and co-founder and director of Spinifex Press, whose most recent book referenced in the interview is Lesbian, Politics, Culture, Existence. In an interesting development, the conservative organization Texas Values reported in a recent press release that Mark Wallace, the CEO of Texas Children's Hospital, is set to retire next month. This announcement comes as the hospital continues to receive public and private scrutiny by Texas parents and lawmakers related to the scandal from allegations that it secretly performed chemical and surgical mutilations on minors, as well as engaged in Medicaid fraud, first exposed by TCH whistleblower Dr. Aiton Heim. And finally, in yet another exclusive, Redux reports that an Indiana man found guilty of strangling his 11-month-old stepdaughter to death and currently serving a 55-year sentence for her murder will receive taxpayer-funded gender-affirming surgeries, plural, after the ACLU successfully sued on his behalf, arguing that he had been subjected to cruel and unusual punishment and discrimination in violation of the 14th Amendment by being denied them. Following his arrest, he would later tell a prison official, "All I know is I killed the little effing bitch." And that's all I have today.
Hello from Australia. It's been a big fortnight. Moira Deeming, Member of Parliament, her trial is midway at the moment through of the Liberal state opposition, John Pasuto. Deeming is claiming defamation based on statements he made after the 2023 Let Women Speak event, where he equated her and organisers with Nazis and Nazi ideology. Pasuto is arguing both contextual truth and honest opinion, aka where there's smoke, it's reasonable to assume there's fire. The trial has so far, from his side, recycled all the baseless accusations, slurs and denunciations seen in 2023 against multiple women, including reading out the Women's Place UK's statement denouncing Kelly J. Keane in full and asking Deeming to denounce it similarly. So the trial continues and is scheduled to finish at the end of next week. The Western Australian Parliament last week pushed through the self-ID bill for birth certificates by use of a standing order created to allow the government to limit debate for urgent bills relating to COVID. The order was not limited in its wording to COVID, however, and is still on the books, so the government is now using it for bills that it wants passed without debate or amendment. The government blocked the bill from going to committee inquiry last month, and last week it gave the upper house just 3 hours to scrutinise 50 clauses before forcing a vote. The vote passed. This is largely because the government has 21 of the 36 seats in the upper house. It's called the Sex or Gender Changes Bill, and even just a motion to change the title to remove sex and have it be called the Gender Changes Bill was voted down with only 7 people in favour. The Federal One Nation leader, Pauline Hanson, that's, I guess, Australia's populist right-wing party, tried to introduce a bill into federal parliament to reintroduce definitions of woman and man into the Sex Discrimination Act based on biological sex. The proposal also would have removed gender identity from the Sex Discrimination Act. The government denied her even the ability to introduce the bill on the floor of Parliament. She initiated a motion to open a Senate inquiry into the bill, and it too was voted down. I do commend her post on the issue, regardless of one's opinion on other One Nation policies. Her post is very reasonable, and I'll pop a link to it in the chat. Queensland Parliament has passed the Respect at Work and Other Matters Amendment Bill. This includes multiple things, but it also includes a criminal offence of serious vilification on the grounds of age, gender identity, impairment, race, religion, sex characteristics, or sexual orientation. Sex in that would, of course, be defined as legal sex, not biological sex. For any public act that includes hatred, extreme ridicule, or that incites hatred, extreme ridicule, or contempt for a person on any of the above grounds, and that would be as determined by a reasonable person who belonged to the target group. Public acts are maybe on private land as long as they're visible in public, and the bill expressly includes that posts on social media are public acts. Acts also include insignia, wearing symbols, displaying colours, if they are associated enough. So it's very drawn very broadly, and I'll put a link to the new law in the chat. Victoria has now announced a public inquiry into implementing a similar law, similar proposed protected characteristics, The gender identity definition is expressly designed to include, they say, drag performers as well. The requirement for any specific threat made will be dropped. It's enough to just incite ridicule. The requirement for intention will be lowered to also include reckless behaviour. There will be a criminal offence and also civil actions. And the bill seeks to criminalise internet activity by people outside Victoria if it victimises a person inside Victoria. But it does currently include a defence for victimisation, not threats, with legitimate political purpose. Public consultation is open on the bill at the moment. That closes the 11th of October this year, and I'll put a link to the public consultation in the chat. Anyone can make a submission. An open letter from Australian clinicians has been published expressing concern over an evidence check they say is flawed and that is being used as the basis for an expansion of New South Wales child gender clinics in opposition to the recommendations of the Cass Review. The Federal Parliament has introduced a misinformation bill. If passed, it would allow any view that the Australian Communications and Media Authority deems to be misinformation to be censored. It covers topics like public health and even banking, but it excludes anything published by the government and establishments such as legacy media. Submissions close the 30th of September, and I'll put a link to a helper page to make a submission in the chat. Australia is now overdue on its periodic review for CEDAW. It's now putting together its report and has given stakeholders only 3 weeks to submit, closing this Thursday, the 26th of September. It opened only on the 5th of September. Submissions will be de-identified, however, and attached as an appendix to the report and sent to the CEDAW committee. So I'll put a link to that in the chat as a last minute thing. And finally, it's expected that the New South Wales Parliament will vote on the upper house will vote on the equality bill this week. That's the self-ID, surrogacy, prostitution, etc. bill. A small presence is planned for outside Parliament in the mornings to remind senators of the importance of the bill to women. Thank you very much.